Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Expectation Church Q&A podcast. Before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping / announcements to make. We have a new text your questions to number. Do not use the old number. If you do, make sure you're very nice because apparently somebody else has claimed that number. So we have a new number to use for your questions. It is 703-828-7861. So you can text your questions in. Also, just as easy, you can email your questions if you'd like to questions@expectation.church. So I'm pretty sure they'll put some graphics somewhere on the screen to fix that for me if I got anything wrong. So we have with us today Pastor Roy and his much smarter than him wife, Tracey. And this is something that we had talked about doing when they got up in front of the church a few weeks ago and did a great message on being a family member. And it was very, conversational and very authentic. They talked about their experience both from a counseling background, from a ministry background, and from raising a family. But we had lots of questions come in during their discussion. So we figured a great way to get to those questions would be to have this podcast. So what we're going to do, for those of you that have already submitted questions, we're not going to be able to get to, for the podcast, we're not going to be able to get to those today. What we're going to do is we're going to go back and answer some of the questions that came in during Roy and Tracey's message a couple of weeks ago here at the church. So I think we'll dive right in. So first question for you, Roy and Tracey. We are supposed to love one another and forgive however many times are necessary. But how do we handle people that are repeatedly mean to us? Forgive, yes, but should we also be doormats? Where should we draw the line?
All right, Pastor Roy.
That's a good question. And the answer about forgiveness is yes, just forgive every time. So the importance of forgiveness is not as much for the other person as it is for yourself. Because if you hold on to those things, you are just building and drawing more resentment or bitterness. So, and resentment is like that pill you take, hoping it kills the other person, but it ends up destroying you. So you want to make sure you're not holding all those things in. And the, part about being mean, I mean, I've dealt with you, Tracey, all my life.
Nice.
No, I'm just kidding.
Nice.
You know how I roll.
Pause.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice.
I always say for somebody who does marriage counseling,
Right?
you always come out with the
man.
best lines.
Come on, man.
No, as far as mean goes, that's like a boundary thing. So
Absolutely.
Times you call me out on stuff, and
My first response to all of it, aside from the forgiveness part, which is a given, like, first of all, pray about it. That's one of those things I feel like we shouldn't have to say, but let us just start with that. Mm-hmm. Take it to the Lord in prayer, first of all. And then the forgiveness part, yes, you need to forgive. But as far as it keeps happening, that's over and over again, you need to set a boundary. And what that boundary looks like is going to be different for every situation. But healthy boundaries. We talked about forgiveness a little bit in our talk that we did a couple of weeks ago. And it's about understanding that not everybody, in an idealized world, our family is our closest relationships, but that in the real world, that's not the way it is, mm-hmm, right? A lot of times nobody can wound you like a family member can. So sometimes as you go through life, those family members, you often talk about an A-list and a B-list people in your life. Those A-list people are the people that are in relationship with you and they're not looking for anything from you. They want to contribute to your life. They want to make your life better. They're going to help you grow. They're going to challenge you. But the B-list people are the people that only are involved in your life, and everything that happens is filtered through how the relationship benefits them. Mm-hmm. So again, in an ideal world, your family is all A-listers, but in reality, a lot of times that's not the way it is. So sometimes you have to set boundaries, and sometimes you have to change your expectations. parents, the older you get, the less likely they are to change. Relationships, the less likely it is to change. If you've got adult children that you've never had a healthy relationship with, sometimes it's a matter of boundaries and managing your expectations.
Yep. And we fall into you're trying to be nice and just get along with people, so you just let this meanness continue on. And sometimes it's just about saying, hey, look, this is what you're saying is really mean and hurtful, and I can't do this anymore. Like if this is the way we're going to continue on, I'd rather just end this conversation right now, or give me a few minutes, because what you're saying is really tough. So let's talk about this again in a half hour or later tonight when the kids are in bed sometimes, if it's a husband and wife, and just making sure that you're giving yourself time in between, because sometimes those mean things come out of moments when you're just in an emotional state rather than intellectual state. So, move that aside so you can get to clear thoughts and clear thinking. So, and it should reduce the mean pieces that are happening. So,
well, and sometimes it's a matter of having that hard conversation, like saying what you said, what I heard may not be what you said. So clarifying, asking, is it really mean, or you've had years of hurt and trauma because of the way they've treated you. So everything that they say now comes across with, what was that supposed to mean? Or I don't think that was very nice. Or we start filtering it through the lens of our experience. And if it's always been a negative experience, even the good things can't get through without being skewed.
Yeah, absolutely. Though that perspective thing.
Perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that the boundaries, if you set boundaries, you're also responsible for keeping the boundaries.
Yes, that's a very good point.
And you don't have to be the sole person responsible for making what those boundaries are. You can, if you are having a problem with another person, you can work with that person to make boundaries that are beneficial for both of you. You can go to your spiritual leader, a pastor, a counselor, and get help in creating what those boundaries should be.
Absolutely.
I've found that to be very helpful to go talk to somebody and say, hey, how do I deal with this? Get somebody else's perspective that cares about me and cares about the Lord. Because the other thing that's very important about forgiveness is, we can talk about forgiveness from a secular view, but from a biblical view, we have to understand that the Bible says when we refuse to forgive other people, that puts a barrier between us and experiencing the forgiveness of the Lord.
Absolutely.
So we need to forgive others so that we can also live in the Lord's forgiveness. I don't know. And there's a lot of debate out there. Does God still forgive, or is God's forgiveness of me dependent upon my actions? And we can debate that all day long. But what's important is you will not live in the forgiveness of the Lord when you are harboring unforgiveness and bitterness in your heart.
Absolutely.
By releasing that, you also invite the forgiveness of the Lord in your own life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And I think that's probably pointing even more so to the healing for yourself, like that, getting that bitterness out is what forgiveness is all about. For your own healing and sake.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Let's go to, since I get to pick the questions, that's fun. How can I fulfill the commandment to honor my father and mother when there have been things they have done that have led to pain, trauma, or anything else that leads to me losing respect for them?
Wow.
These are good questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take it away, counselor.
The honoring the father and mother, those pieces are, should always be there. So there's always a way to still show honor and show them that you love them, respect them on some level, regardless of some of the things that are happening. If it's I'm in the home and definite trauma and abuse or painful things like that are happening, I mean, this is you got to pick up the phone and get the help that needs to happen in that family. And sometimes that's a difficult piece or situation to do. So I'm talking about the, really difficult moment that would be, but on the same token, you're able to show honor because, like, I want this family to change. I want, things to move in a good direction. And so it's not that you're dishonoring them if you need to do something like that, but that you're showing more honor because let's get the external help sometimes that we need in this family and in this situation. But if we're talking, somebody who has been out of the home, and maybe you've had some years to reflect on it, and you want to approach that parent, sometimes that's difficult, but needed. I mean, for that same concept that we talked about earlier, the forgiveness, the healing, the repair of the relationship. So, even if that family member doesn't want to acknowledge it, or say, oh, you should just get over it, those kind of things do happen in family conversations. But being able to say, well, I've said the pieces that I need to say so that my heart and mind is clear. And then on maybe sometimes a boundary needs to be
Right.
there for
It's boundaries again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. So I can forgive you, but you continuing to hurt or cause this trauma can't continue on. So I think sometimes we get forgiveness mixed up with restoration. So
Right.
not every time is forgiveness about this relationship coming back into full swing or full way that it used to be.
I think
Right.
that's a really important point, that forgiving them isn't forgetting what happened.
Mhm.
And the biggest piece of the big thing to remember with trauma is that trauma happened to you. It doesn't define you. So whatever has happened in your past, that was something that was external.
Mhm.
You aren't responsible for the trauma that happened. You are maybe the one that's carrying the weight of it, but restoring that relationship may be as simple as releasing the anger and the legitimate hurt. And when you do that, it doesn't mean that the hurt that they caused you didn't matter. Of course it does. It breaks
Mhm.
God's heart. He loves you like a father. He is our father. But that doesn't mean that what they did doesn't matter. It just means that you're just relinquishing the power that anger and that
Right.
hurt has over you, so that you can experience the fullness of joy. You can experience that full life in Christ that he promises for his children, that he wants to give you. And it takes a long time. A lot of times, there'll be things that trigger you and bring all of that hurt back. But that doesn't mean that it's a journey, not a sprint, or a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so you set those boundaries, you let it go, you forgive, you don't forget. And maybe you just need to disconnect from that relationship. Setting a boundary and having a distant relationship isn't dishonoring, because at a certain point, if that person is going to continue to bring trauma into your life, you are not responsible to have a relationship. You don't have to have a relationship with them, right? You don't have to do Christmas and Thanksgiving together. You don't have to do Father's Day, Mother's Day. It's okay to set those boundaries.
Mm.
I think something that is so prevalent in our culture is this idea, and I think this is why we're so difficult to forgive, why we're so slow to forgive, is oftentimes we've inculcated this idea of clinging on to our victimhood like a security blanket,
Yes.
and
We wrap
this-
ourselves in it like a shroud,
right.
right?
This happened to me, so this is now who I am. And
Right.
we want to hold on to it, when in Christ, he went to the cross so that he could be the victim on our behalf, so that we could be victorious in him.
Absolutely.
So we need to take off that shroud of victimhood,
Mhm.
which, as I understand, is a lot easier said than
Oh,
done.
absolutely.
But we also need to understand it's not just taking off the victimhood. We can embrace,
Mhm.
this is what it means to put on Christ. We can embrace victory in Christ.
Absolutely. It's moving from victim to victor.
Right.
And we also have that whole pop culture mindset that we're going to have closure. We're not always going to have closure. Like you may live the rest of your life never getting an apology, sometimes even an acknowledgement of what happened from the person who wounded you. And you have to be okay with that. That's part of the healing process, is just being okay with, what I may never really be able to fully cross this off. You have ideas about closure. What do you think? As a counselor, as a clinical counselor, talk to us about closure.
Well, yeah, closure is sometimes a modern made up word about, that like, do you really ever, have this thing fully wrapped up? So, because sometimes you don't get that chance, because, that person that has hurt you for years is now in the grave, and
Right.
you'll never be able to rehash that. So, closure then becomes, if you're looking for something that's just like, here's the the embodiment of that. It's about the personal healing more than the
Yeah.
closure piece of it, because closure sometimes takes several different people that might not play that game well with you. So you got to be able to have that piece of that healing and forgiveness and becoming whole and healthy within yourself. So it takes some. I think it takes for me, come from a biblical perspective, it takes some time in the Word of God, and just I have seen many times where just reading the Word of God, and somehow in my daily reading or whatever, that verse pops out, and it's like, man, I needed to hear that today.
I think Psalm
And it's the
119,
work that
105, your
does.
word is the light to my feet and the lamp to my path. God will give you enough that you need for that day, to get through that day, to take that next step. He's only promising to give us enough light for the next step. Sometimes we can see way down the road. Sometimes you can only see enough to just take that next step. So start where you are, right? Just take that light to your feet, stay in the Word, and be humble. Ask for, don't be so proud of your victimhood, right? I think that's another piece of it too. Like we define ourselves by it, and you can't be angry with me because I'm this, right? We just take that trauma and we define ourselves by it. Trauma is complex. That deserves its own whole. And
when you take that victimhood piece, I mean, it's basically you're giving the devil a big stick to beat you with. So he's like, okay, you're a victim. Yeah, let's keep you down here. Right. And so you don't want to do that. It's not healthy. It's not the right way to go.
Mm-mm.
Can you talk about the relationship between parents and kids when the kids have moved away and started their own lives and families, from both the parents and the adult kids' perspectives?
Wow. Yeah, I'd say for the adult piece of that, like when your kids move out, I mean, just bless them and let them move out and start their own family. So it's not about, well, you're not doing things the way we did it, or, I mean, my parents would have a long list of things I don't do the way they would want me to do today. So that's just the way it is. But being able to, what I've appreciated, especially about my dad, is he said, hey, there are many things I'm proud of you about. So, and he is capitalizing on those things. So I would say as a parent, just, the things that you are super proud of and love about those kids, I mean, just keep filling that into their lives, and remembering that parent relationship has changed. So you're not in charge of them anymore. So you have passed that responsibility under the hands of their almighty Father, and he can take care of them if there's something they're doing that is outside of what he would want them to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a natural transition, right? Our parents did it when they got married. We did it when we got married, and now our children are doing it as adults themselves. Yeah. So allowing them the freedom to start their own traditions, to have their own separate lives.
Yeah.
You still want to be involved, obviously, but it's the challenges that come, those sticky things that you talked about in your message that come with the transition. Yeah. And can I just say that as a couple, this is why it's very important to pour into your marriage from the day you say your vows, because that's why so many couples today, the divorce rate, pardon me, for couples our age is very high and growing, because couples have poured their heart and their soul and their attention into their children and not into their relationship. Right. The best thing you can do for your children is to not make them, as Ed Young has that book, Kid CEO. The kid has the corner office with the window and you're working in the broom closet. If you aren't pouring into your marriage, then when your kids leave, you're roommates. Right. You're not a couple anymore. Yeah. So it's really important to stay engaged in your marriage. Be intentional about that relationship.
Yeah.
All along. And it's hard. It's when the kids are little, it's really hard because you don't get enough sleep, and you're lucky to shower or get to pee by yourself without little hands coming under the door. Yeah. Hey. So, but you just have to figure out a time. You have to be intentional about it. Yeah. And that season is just a season. It gets better, and then you run into teenage years and you're back to crying in the closet again. But yeah, you have to be intentional. Good marriages don't just happen. Good marriages take prayer and attention, and anything that's going to succeed takes work. And that includes your marriage.
Yeah.
I always tell people in premarital counseling, This is the last session that I do in premarital counseling is when I give parting advice. And one of the pieces of parting advice I give is Christ first, then your spouse, then your kids.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And for a lot of the same reasons. And people balk at that because they think, well, shouldn't I be taking care of my kids first? And I say, by putting Christ first, you will be a better husband or better
Absolutely.
wife. And by
Absolutely.
putting your spouse first, you will be a better parent to your
Absolutely.
kids. So if you want to take care of your kids, you take care of your spouse. If you want to take care of your spouse,
Absolutely.
you need to make sure you're taking care of your relationship with Jesus.
That's
Yep.
right.
And speaking to that same idea of we talked about the parents' point of view of the kids moving out of the house and what should the children do, and so it's about still honoring your parents in those moments when you're moving out, but it's also about trying to set up for success, right? So for us right now, we have a family dinner night that the kids come to, and we're appreciative of that. But that wasn't something we set up. That was something they set up. So,
Right. Because who doesn't want free food?
right? But left haphazardly, we would have, maybe had this, we never see the kids. They never just come and hang out. And those kind of things could have happened to us. So in the same way that you'd want to dump time and attention into any relationship, do the same with that and get out of the headspace. I think the best thing you could do as a parent is when those kids move out is to not think of yourself as the parent anymore on some level, because those kids are always having, I think it's innate that we always want to have the approval of mom and dad, right?
Sure.
So whenever there's those moments of feeling some kind of tension or disapproval, you're destroying that a little bit. So
yeah, and I think that relationship between parents and kids can be really strengthened if, really through empathy. If a parent, parents, you raised your kids, so you should know your kids better than most people. So instead of thinking, I know what's best for my kid, once your kids are grown, you should start thinking, what would my kid, who's now an adult, what would they appreciate? How can I empathize with who this person is? Because I should know this person. Same thing for, a kid. Whenever there's a potential as a child, as an adult child, one of the things that we do is when mom and dad come over, we get upset because mom and dad still do things their way, but I'm an adult now and I have my own way of doing things. So that causes friction. Well, show a little bit of empathy because you are an adult, but they've been an adult for much longer. Yeah. So maybe what would mom and dad want? How can I step into their shoes? Yeah. Just as mom and dad should be stepping into the kids' shoes. So.
Yeah, and that's exactly, Christian, that point of, it's just it's not that I know so much more than my kids, but I've just I know so much more because I've been down that journey a little bit longer. So,
Sure.
but think that I need to pile that on my kids. It's only if they want that information. I once had a conversation with a family who was really upset with their kid, and they were, just talking about, it's difficult parenting them and everything. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about your child. And they were like, oh, they're 22. And I'm like, what? And you're using the word parent here? Like, come on.
Yeah.
So,
well, we raise our kids to leave, right? That's the whole point. We're not just raising children, we're raising adults. So when you look at your children as these are future adults, I'm not raising these children to stay in my home forever. So it's a little backwards to be grieved when they leave and start their own lives and start their own families, right? That was the whole point of their childhood and their teenage years and going off to university or going to school or whatever. So we could train them to leave the nest. So to be bent when they actually do what we raised them to do is a little...
Sure. And it's
confusing for your kids, right?
Well, I think, and I think you'll agree with me, Trace, that
no, I don't know about that. Sure. Let's see how that goes.
I think that's
Tell
another
more.
question. But I think the proudest moments we have is because we always want to shield our kids, even when they get older.
Sure.
I am constantly about what's going on with Kaylee, what's going on with Kaylee.
Sure.
And I don't need to be.
Right.
And so
we have a daughter that lives in Toronto.
Yes.
So
I'm constantly reminded by Tracy, hey, you need to cool your jets there. She's going to be fine. time. Like, how could she know what she wants to do when she's 28 years old? And it's like, that's so stupid. I can't even believe that came out of my mouth, right?
A 28-year-old woman with a college degree has paid her own bills for 8 years, but how could she possibly get through a Thursday without her dad?
And especially this past year, like my proudest moment actually is looking at, she got through this year. She had lost a job through COVID and everything, but then she's picked up another job and whatever. And last night she bought her car.
Yeah, she bought her
and
car.
I'm like, whoa, that is awesome.
Right.
Like this.
And can we borrow $20?
Yeah, exactly.
You are a grown up.
Look at her being a grown up.
So, and then, I remember one moment when Sarah, she of course lives here in Fairfax near us. And I remember one moment just feeling a sense of pride because she was breaking up with this guy that was, they had kind of sort of dated. It was a long distance kind of thing. And, you want to build strength within your children. And Sarah, when they were breaking up, he started saying all these things like, you're a good girl, somebody will want you and all this stuff. And she flat said, oh no, you do not talk to me like that. I am going to be just fine. And I don't need you to console me. I was like, yes, you said that to him. Way to go. And it made me have a proud moment as a dad because we instilled some, pride and self-respect there and everything. So
Sure.
Yep. So it's being able to, back to that one idea of being able to be proud of those moments like that. And that's what pushes the relationship further as a parent with adult children.
Well, we had the advantage, both of our parents, we lived close to both your mom and dad and my parents when we first got married, and they were very gracious with us. We were the first ones married. Roy and I are both the oldest, so we were the first ones married, first one out of the house. And our parents were very gracious with us as we tried to, we're grown. We know so much, right? So they were my mom and dad were very patient with us, and your parents as well. We had good examples modeling how to handle that transition from our parents. So I think that gave us a little bit of an advantage that maybe others don't have. So, but that helped us as Kaylee and Sarah transitioned out. So.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about kids. I'm going to take it now to husband and wife. And this is one that I actually looked at a lot when I was preparing for this last sermon because 1 Peter 3, 1-7 speaks to this. But what is a wife to do? Well, it kind of speaks to this. What is a wife to do when her Christian husband doesn't take the spiritual role in the household?
Yeah.
I would take it back to what God's design for marriage is. So God created men and women equal. We have different roles within the marriage, but we are equal in value, equal in God's sight, equally worthy of his love and receiving of his love. But God made the wife to be a helpmeet. So when we talk about what that means in terms of this, as far as being the spiritual leader, just because your idea of what a spiritual leader is doesn't fit, or what your husband is doing doesn't fit your idea of what a spiritual leader is, doesn't mean that he's not leading. And if you don't feel like he's being the strong leader or the example that you feel he should be, that's where you as a helpmeet come in to come alongside him and guide him and lead him.
Yeah.
I'm very structured. I like things organized. I like to have a plan. I like to have a schedule. Roy is like, man, it'll be fine. That stresses me out. So but it's not funny.
I've never noticed that before.
There we go.
I have.
Right? Man, it'll be done. So Roy and I work together well when we have very defined roles. And that includes in our home. So when the girls were growing up, Roy was never going to be the guy that said, we're having family devotions every night after dinner. We're going to sit down and we're going to read scripture, because sometimes things are chaotic. Sometimes things are busy. So I kind of took the lead on the structuring the time. Roy was the leader. He led he would read the scripture or he'd unpack questions. Yeah. We had a great devotional for our kids back when they were little, Sticky Situations. And it was just a short paragraph or two. It was you saw Christian cheat on his spelling test. Do you tell your teacher or do you not tell your teacher? Right. So, and then it, brings in a verse. So Sticky Situations, great low key, biblical principles, devotional for kids.
elementary kids.
Yeah, for elementary kids. But I was the one that did the structure on that. That didn't mean that you weren't the spiritual leader in our home. You were a very godly example. My dad and mom were very much the same. I grew up in a home with 2 Christian parents who both loved the Lord. My mom had been Catholic. My dad was very kind of meh about church and faith. But when they both got saved, it was my mom that was always the one that was like, there was no question about whether or not we were going to church. Like, we just knew my mom was going to make sure. And she always did when she was Catholic as well. My mom was always not the spiritual leader, but the one that was more intentional about what we did. That didn't in any way diminish the fact that my dad was the spiritual head of our home and did lead us by everything he said and did, and brought us to church. And he was just as on board about, yes, we're going to church as my mom was. But that was just the different personalities, different dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a piece of, within that family dynamic, the husband and wife, what pieces you carry. So, because the consistency for sure in our home was about you, and that those teaching elements and bringing the Bible to light and everything. Would it be fair to say that I kind of exude Christianity for this? It's just flow.
Look at me.
Yes, right. Just the waves of holiness roll off him. Yeah, exactly. Jesus, nicer brother over here.
But the interesting thing was the difference though of our personalities, like Tracy's. When the kids were coming up in toddler ages in elementary, like the consistency and whatever, she was the go-to parent really, because she had, and I was like, and I just, the father, you probably done this, fathers, just say, go ask your mother. I don't know what the answer is to this, or whether you can do this or not. But then it changed a little bit, and I kind of took more a stronger role in their teenage years, because I could, see things a little not as black and white and structured and whatever.
You were swimming in the estrogen ocean. Even the dog was a girl. So
that's right.
So sometimes just needed that calm peace, right?
But I had a little different view of it. So them coming into some more independence and whatever, I kind of was lifting the barriers a little bit and letting some of that happen in the way that I do. So
again, it just comes back to preference and style. Just because your husband isn't doing, what's the joke about, I didn't know there was a wrong way to load the dishwasher until I got married, right?
Right.
So
for me, it was doing socks and laundry.
Socks and laundry. See, right? Yeah, boy, I had to learn. We had laundry lessons too. But just understanding that just because what your husband is doing doesn't fit the model that you are thinking of, doesn't make it wrong.
Right.
It's just different. So that's where you come alongside and help him lead. You lead with him. You lead alongside him. You don't run ahead of him. You never berate him or run him down in front of your kids, because that is counterproductive on so many levels. But you encourage him, pray with him, pray for him, and then pick up where, it's unreasonable to ask them to do something that is wholly outside their skill set, right? In any situation.
Yeah. Or personality.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah, it's the whole bilateral or leading up principle.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And a lot of times it can just simply be addressed by going to your husband and saying, hey, I want to help lead our family. I want to help, in the spiritual development of our family. Yeah. Do you have ideas? Like, invite him into the leadership position.
Absolutely.
Rather than commanding or telling him to lead or telling him to get in line.
Right.
That flies in the face of Ephesians 5. It's not going to be beneficial for you or him.
Yeah, and sometimes in those situations, I think husbands freeze. They're like, "Oh, I don't know what to do, but I'm being asked to do this, and I gotta figure this out." It's okay, husbands, to just say, "Well, why don't you start us off? Tell us, how do you want this to go, and let's go." I'm like, we'll manage it. We'll work through this together and figure out how we want to. Do everything from raising the kids to, to having those times where we're giving some spiritual instruction to them. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you let go of past wrongs that a husband doesn't understand while you still are bothered by it?
That's a you question, Trace.
How am I going to let go of all the things you've said in this conversation this morning? I think it all goes back to what we were talking about earlier about forgiveness. Just understanding that what you heard isn't necessarily what was said. Being bold enough to ask those hard questions, like when you said this, do you understand that really hurts me when you say this? Because a lot of times people are coming from a place of ignorance. Their intent may not be to be mean or to repeatedly cause you hurt. Are you having that conversation to say, you know what, when you say this, you make me feel really small, or I find it really hurtful when you say that, or I feel disrespected or unvalued. The things that you were talking about on Sunday, Christian's message about husbands knowing your wife. If you aren't having those hard conversations, then it's not all on your husband that he's still doing. You help him to know you.
Yeah,
and as
exactly.
husbands, you have to be willing to listen.
Right.
There's a verse in Psalms that says,
you have to be willing to listen and not fix.
And not fix, which I will tell you is a conversation that Roy and I have had many times. When you're married to a therapist, there's been more than once where we've had I just need you to hear me. I don't need you to heal me. I don't need you to take steps. I don't need you to run ahead of me. I just need to externalize what's happening. And there's a verse in Psalms, I can't remember the reference, but pride, I forget how it goes, but it's pride. Pride leads to conflict. The wise man takes advice. That's a really paraphrased way of saying it. Maybe it's in Proverbs. But the whole point of the verse is, as a husband, you should be hearing if your wife is telling you that really hurt me. And if you're too proud to admit it, then let's start there. But wise people take advice. So husbands and wives should be willing to take advice. Make sure that you're getting clarification of when you said, I heard. We do that a lot of times to make sure, like if I get my feelings hurt about something because when you said that, I heard this. And Roy will say, well, that's not at all what I meant. So if you work on clarifying those things, it can go a long way.
Yeah, it's a great listening exercise.
Absolutely, right? And again, it's being intentional. You're actually listening. You're not just hearing what they're saying. Hearing is just noise. Listening is actually paying attention, and you're hearing the intention behind the word and the emotion behind the words. Because sometimes the argument you're having isn't really the argument that you're having.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes many times you will tell me something and you'll be frustrated and you'll say, I think I've told you this 1,000 times. and
I usually have.
And instead of getting like frustrated with that or angry with you, I just say, well, I apparently need to hear it 1,001 times. So go ahead and say it again. And please forgive me for not listening. Because that just happens. And I don't mean it to happen, but no. I know that I can be an insensitive jerk, really, sometimes, and that's just
we all can, right? Yeah. So goes back to some of what you talked about in our talk that day was learning each other's communication style, right? So I talk a lot, no surprise there. Roy doesn't talk so much. So we had to learn how to fight. We had to learn how to communicate. We needed to learn a lot of things because two very unique people coming from two very different homes. Yeah. So you need to learn how to come together and be on the same page at the end of the day with stuff.
And I think it's important to lead the whole concept from Sunday about what you said, Christian, about knowing your wife and then doing and saying
That's
those
it,
things.
right? It's not enough to know it. You have to, now you're responsible.
Yeah.
To act on it. To him that knows to do good and doesn't do it, that's sin.
Absolutely.
So if God has shown you something and your wife has expressed a need to you and you're choosing not to act on it, that's on you.
Yeah.
Right? So
absolutely. Yeah. And knowing even knowing even where, like when you've gone too far, right? So sometimes when Tracy and I are in, she's trying to tell me something and I, haven't needed to hear it for the 1,100 times or whatever that may be. But then I'm kind of the like, let's fix this now kind of guy. So I'll want to talk about things right away, and she needs a minute. So the emotions ran high, and so the one killer statement that I know I need to stop right now. and it's okay, husbands and wife, to have these conversations. Like, here's the statement I make, that it's got to be the end of this for at least right now. Doesn't mean you don't go back to it, but you got to
put a pin in it.
Put a pin in it. So she'll say to me, I just got to tell you right now, if I said the things I want to say, it would not be good. And I would
can't
say
make bread
things
be toast, or can't make toast be bread again.
That's right. And I would say things that I would not mean, and I would regret it. And that's my out. I'm like, okay, I understand. So, because I don't want to hear hurtful things.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for addressing topics that you feel are important with your spouse that also could be points of tension? In other words, how can you bring up topics that might cause a confrontation? So tips for doing that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I always say come in with what pieces of responsibility do I take for what happened.
Very good.
It's about I know this is what I did. So, and and what you're doing is you're mirroring or showing to your lovely wife that I will take responsibility for all my stuff. And I'm giving you the freedom and the open space to do the same. And so if you do that right and you bring those things out, and it's in that loving way, right? It's so speaking the truth in love, that whole concept in the Bible there. Mm-hmm. And that love is not about somebody you don't know. It's somebody you're intimate with, and you know this person because you love them. And so being able to speak those things and take that responsibility, many times we'll have that good exchange that everybody's taking responsibility for the piece that they have. And then once you get past, this is what happened, then you can do the fixing thing. Okay, well, what can we do differently? Like, what do you need from me? What do I need from you? And it's cooperation. And you've used all the great forms of assertive communication rather than being aggressive or passive aggressive, all these other ways that people talk sometimes. Yeah.
I think timing is important. Picking your moment. Right. So sometimes I know personally when the girls were little and it was a long day and, you had spent a whole day at work, and even when those last years that we were in Ontario and you were working with domestic violence and you were working with anger management. So you listened to heavy stories all day, and then you'd come home from work and I'd have my list. Right. So it's a matter of that's probably not the time to dive into something really heavy and hard. You need those decompression, right? It's like catch your breath, change your clothes, wash your face, have a glass of water, have a beer, have a whatever, just relax, wait for your moment, pick your moment, and just then say, once emotions aren't high or that you aren't already tense or you aren't already up here, just saying, hey, there's something on my mind and I wonder, can we take a minute and just talk? Wait till the kids are in bed, turn off the TV, put your phone down, put your phone away, and just active listening again. And just say, this is a hard conversation. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a little bit nervous about it. Yeah. But I'm just, I really need to, I love you. And this relationship is really important to me. And in order for us to be on the same page and to be that one flesh that Scripture talks about, I really need to talk about this so we can work on it together. Right.
Yeah. You hit everything I was thinking. I think lots of times you'd be amazed just going in with that humility and transparency, just as exactly what you just said, to walk into the conversation to say, we need to have this conversation and I'm scared to because, but I still think it's important because I love you. And just that people always, and I agree, absolutely. You both said everything I was thinking. I think it's a terrible idea to try to sneak the conversation in or try to be passive aggressive about it.
That's emotional manipulation, and that is toxic.
Yeah, it won't
absolutely
do anything
toxic
good.
To a relationship.
So just be upfront, be honest, be transparent. And it's okay to be intentional and strategic about the conversations that are going to be difficult. It's funny, we go through life, with our finances, people who are really good at finances, they're strict on their budgeting and they have a plan and they're smart about it and they think about it. And then you ask those people, how are you handling your relationship? Oh, it's a mess. Well, why don't you take some of the same effort that you put into other areas of your life and apply it to your relationships? It's not that relationships are, formulaic or methodical, but just that level of detail and that level of attention and care can really do a lot for handling those. And
understand that it might not get get fixed in that single conversation. Right. You may, if it is a hard conversation, then emotions are going to run high and people are going to potentially get their feelings hurt. So just say, you know what, we need to put a pin in this and we'll come back. Let's think about it, pray about it, and come back to this when we're both feeling a little bit more calm. Yeah. Right. Don't keep pushing. A fool speaks his whole mind. A wise man keeps it in until afterwards. You don't have to say everything that you're thinking in that moment.
Right. And if it's a little clumsy or whatever, you give each other forgiveness and grace and try to clear that statement up. And why did you say it that way or whatever? the other thing I think is about not making it about the person, but about the problem.
Attack the problem, not the person.
So when those difficult moments come up, it's about not saying you always and you never, or just always pointing to the person for what they've done. Because if the person is the problem, the solution is get rid of the person, and that's the end of the relationship, right? But if the problem remains the problem, then the two of you can become allies against the problem rather than against the person.
Right. Your teammates, not opponents at that point.
Right.
Yeah. So for Tracey and I, a lot of times the problem might just be worry, or many times it's finance. But worry sometimes, and it's just like, well, look, let's just talk about the worry. What are you worried about? Here's what I'm worried about. And then we start to formulate this whole thing where we can both work at how do we get worry out of the relationship or out of the situation that we find ourselves in.
Sure.
And it helps.
Yep. Okay, so we are at 45 minutes right now, so we should probably wrap it up. There were 4 questions that we didn't get to. However, I do think that they were answered in the other questions that were asked. So for those of you that feel like your question wasn't specifically answered, I would say for Pastor Roy and his wife, how can we have peace in our hearts with family members who have mistreated us? I would refer you to the earlier questions, and we talked about boundaries. How do you proceed forward with a very toxic family member who has done things to you, but they still have a relationship with your child? Meaning, I know we should forgive, but what about family members who are toxic? Again, I refer back to the discussion on forgiveness and boundaries. How can I let go of little things that irritate me so it doesn't grow? We just talked about that with the bringing up of discussions and talking through things, uniting with each other against the problem. And then the last question, which was, what is the toughest thing you had to go through as a family, and how were you strengthened by it? To that, I would say you should come to Expectation Church on a Sunday and grab Roy and Tracey and ask them that.
Nice. That's a good answer.
Yeah. Come talk to us. We've got lots we'll unpack. We're pretty transparent about what we've done right and what we've done wrong.
It was a shameless plug to invite people to church.
I'm all about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll just lurk around the
you.
red tent. Come to the red tent and we'll talk to you.
So we have services at 9 and 11 a.m. and we are online streaming, so you can join us there if you're not local for the 11 o'clock service on Sundays. With that said, thank you very much to Roy and Tracey for helping us with this podcast. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Excellent. Thank you.
So before we go on to our next podcast that will be coming out soon at some point, if you have any other questions that you would like us to tackle on this Q&A podcast, please email questions at expectation.church. Or send a text message to 703-828-7861, and we will do our best to talk about your questions. Thanks for giving us discussion topics. Until next time, I hope that, as Pastor Roy would say, Lord bless you, and we appreciate you tuning in.